The man who ruined my life 8 years ago. The man I thought abandoned me. I found him digging through trash to survive. But when I asked why he disappeared, his answer shattered everything I believed. I recognized him first by the way his shoes scraped the pavement. Kank. The rest of him looked nothing like the man I'd once married. His shoulders were bent as if the air itself was heavy, clothes hanging from his frame, hair tangled into a gray, uneven mess. He stood half inside a dumpster, behind the supermarket, fishing out bottles and cans with cracked fingers and dropping them into a torn plastic sack. Yeah. I froze on the sidewalk, clutching the envelope of bank documents against my chest. It couldn't be, but the tilt of his head, the shape of his hands, the way he wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist, they were all familiar. 10 years of shared life returned in a single heartbeat. The smell of coffee in the mornings, arguments over bills, the promise of a house with a garden one day. Rowan? I heard myself whisper. He turned at the sound of my voice. For a second, his eyes went blank, as if his brain refused to connect what he was seeing. Then recognition slid across his face, like a storm shadow. He tried to step deeper into the dumpster, to hide as if disappearing into trash could erase him, Nora. The name left his lips like it hurt. Up close, the smell of sweat and stale beer clung to him. His face was hollow, his beard shot with white, his cheeks caved in. The last time I'd seen him, he'd been in a dark blue suit, signing contracts, laughing with colleagues. The next day he'd simply never come home. What happened to you? My voice came out sharper than I intended. Why are you living like this? He shook his head, staring at the ground. You shouldn't see me like this. Go home. Forget you saw me. I did try to forget, I snapped. For 8 years, a car sped past. Horns blared far away. On our tiny corner of the street, time felt trapped in amber. He leaned a hand against the metal rim of the dumpster, breathing hard, as if the conversation itself exhausted him. Ekin, I thought you were dead, I said, my throat tight. Or in prison. Or, I don't even know. You left a note saying it's better this way. And I lost everything, Rowan. The house, the savings. My name. Fa. His fingers clenched around the edge of the dumpster until the knuckles whitened. I know, he whispered. I watched from far away. I watched everything fall on you instead of me. Rage flared in my chest. Then why didn't you come back? He finally lifted his gaze. There was something there I had never seen before in him. Terror, not of me, but for me. Because I had to choose, he murmured. My life or yours. The world narrowed to his words. What does that even mean? I demanded. His lips parted, but all the color drained from his face. He swayed, one hand flying to his chest. Before I could reach him, his legs buckled. He crumpled to the asphalt like an empty bag. Rowan! I fell to my knees beside him, shouting for help, but his last hoarse whisper before he passed out sliced through me. He'll ruined everything to keep you alive, Uncle. If the man who destroyed your life suddenly told you he did it to save you, would you believe him? The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and overcooked soup. Machines beeped softly around him, measuring the fragile rhythm of a life that had once seemed indestructible. I sat in the hard plastic chair, hands knotted in my lap, watching him sleep. Akel. 8 years earlier, Rowan had vanished between one ordinary morning and the next. He'd kissed my cheek, promised he'd be home late because of meetings, and disappeared into city traffic. That night he didn't return, the night after either. On the third day, a courier brought an envelope. Kenk, inside, just 1 page, I'm sorry. It's better this way, don't look for me. Right after that, the avalanche began. Accounts frozen due to investigation. Our house put up for forced auction. Letters accusing him of fraud and misappropriation. People whispered that I must have known, that I'd enjoyed the money too, that I was pretending to be a victim. No one believed that I was as blindsided as they were. Cow. I learned to live in one rented room at 53, scrubbing floors by day, folding napkins in a restaurant at night. I learned to answer questions about my husband with a shrug and a lie. He's gone. That's all. Hatred had been my only shield. Ink. Now that same man lay in front of me, thinner than the sheets covering him, with an IV taped to the back of his hand. Narcan. When he finally woke, his eyes darted to the door first, as if expecting someone else. "It's just me," I said. "The woman whose life you burned to the ground." He winced. "Nora, you should have left when I told you." I leaned forward. "You fainted in the street. You said you destroyed everything to keep me alive. You don't get to throw a sentence like that and then die on me." "You're going to explain, okay?" His gaze drifted to the ceiling. For a moment I thought he'd pretend to sleep again. "By spurple sarpa for 30 kos he that's de weta 6 supposed to die." Then his Adam's apple bobbed. "The day I disappeared," he said slowly, "was the day I was supposed to die." And a bitter laugh escaped me. "What is that supposed to mean? Some kind of drama?" "No." His voice was barely a rasp. "It was part of the deal. Either I went to prison and you had an accident, or I took the fall their way and vanished. They preferred me ruined and invisible." "They who?" I demanded. He stared at the wall, jaw tight, as if the very idea of saying more hurt. "I signed papers I shouldn't have signed," he continued. "Construction contracts, fake suppliers. I thought it was routine. When I questioned it, they showed me photos of you, your routines, your bus stop, the dark street you cut through to save 10 minutes at night." Cold prickled along my arms. "They told me errors happen," he whispered. "Break-ins, robberies, drivers who don't brake in time. They wanted a scapegoat, Nora. Someone to blame when everything came out. And they wanted to be sure I understood the cost of disobedience." I swallowed hard. "So you chose to disappear instead of telling me?" I chose you hating me," he said, eyes shining, "over visiting your grave." My years of fury trembled, cracking around the edges. But somewhere beyond the hospital walls, I could feel it. Whatever he'd touched back then was still out there. Watching. Egress. If the people who ruined your life were willing to kill once, what would they do when you started asking questions again? The next days blurred into a loop of nurses, test results, and my own thoughts gnawing on themselves. Rowan slept a lot, sedated and exhausted. I stayed. I told myself it was curiosity, maybe some twisted need for closure. But every time he stirred and looked for me with that guilty panic, I knew it was something heavier. Peckle. On the third day, when the corridor finally quieted, I closed the door and pulled my chair closer. "Kat, we're done with half-truths," I said. "If you're going to drag my life back into whatever this is, I deserve the whole story. Okay?" He studied me for a long moment, as if measuring how much I could bear. "Yeah, it started with a road project," he said at last. "Big, shiny, splashed all over the news. New highway, new jobs, new future. I was the technical director. Perfect reputation, boring life, exactly what they needed. Cow." He spoke slowly, resting every few sentences. "A web emerged. Shell companies bidding against each other. Inflated invoices, kilometers of asphalt that existed only on paper. He'd been told to sign, and he had, trusting the lawyers, the accountants, the managers who smiled too easily. Tet. When I realized the numbers didn't add up," he continued, "I tried to pull out. Naive, right? I thought doing the right thing still meant something." He gave a humorless smile. "That night 2 men waited for me in the parking garage. Gray sedan, no plates I recognized. They weren't interested in explaining. They put a folder on my lap. Inside were bank transfers under my name, fake signatures, offshore accounts. It was all fabricated but convincing enough to destroy me in court. And me?" I asked quietly. "Yuck." He closed his eyes. "They had photos of you. They knew where you worked, where your sister lived, the times you took cash from the ATM. They said if I tried to denounce them, we'd both go down. But if I cooperated, they'd limit the damage to my reputation. By erasing you. And by turning me into the villain," he corrected. "A corrupt engineer who stole everything and then ran. They needed a face for their crime, Nora. I was the perfect mask." He fell silent. The monitor next to him beeped steadily, at odds with the chaos in my chest. "Why didn't they just kill you?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Dead men don't pay, he said simply. Ray live, I could sign away assets, surrender accounts, keep my mouth shut when called to testify. And as long as I obeyed, you kept waking up in the morning. My stomach twisted. Kel. So all those years I was cleaning offices at dawn, people whispering behind my back, You were, what? Hiding in alleys? He nodded once. The money didn't last. I couldn't work with my name. I moved from city to city. Whatever I touched, they watched. Sometimes I saw men outside the places I slept. They wanted to remind me I was still on a leash. His chest rose and fell with effort. He reached for my wrist with surprising strength. But I didn't just disappear, he whispered. I kept something. A last card. Just in case someone like you refused to keep living in the dark. A chill ran down my spine. What card? A box, he said. Hidden years ago. Documents, recordings, contracts they never knew I copied. Enough to drag them into daylight, if it lands in the right hands before they find it. Where is it, Rowan? His gaze drifted to the window. Underneath what's left of my old workshop. Yuck. The thin hairs on my arms stood up. If the proof that could destroy powerful men was buried in a place anyone could find, how far would you go to dig it up? And how many eyes might already be watching it? Part C. The old workshop sat at the edge of the industrial district, squeezed between a warehouse that now sold cheap furniture and an empty lot where weeds grew taller than me. Once, I'd brought Rowan lunch here on Saturdays. He'd been covered in sawdust and engine oil, grinning like a boy with a new toy. Now the metal gate hung crooked, paint flaking like scabs. I almost turned back twice. Kang, his instructions ran through my head. Back room, left wall, the false panel behind the shelves. Under the concrete not too deep, I couldn't take much weight that day. I pushed the gate. It squealed, announcing me to whoever cared to listen. Inside, dust floated through slices of light. Old workbenches, broken stools, forgotten tools. My footsteps echoed, too loud. Every sound felt like an alarm. Quick, Nora, I muttered to myself. The back room smelled of oil and mold. Shelves leaned under the weight of boxes, filled with bolts and rusted machine parts. I ran my fingers along the wall until they snagged on a rough edge. A rectangle of plaster that didn't quite match the rest. I wedged a screwdriver into the crack. The panel groaned, then fell forward, crashing at my feet. There it was, a square of patched concrete. I grabbed the nearest metal rod and started chipping. The rhythm of metal on stone beat the seconds out of my chest. Sweat trickled down my back. It wasn't a deep layer. Rowan had told the truth. Soon the concrete crumbled to reveal a metal corner. A box, gunmetal gray, its lid sealed with tape yellowed by time. My hands shook as I pulled it free. It was heavier than I'd expected. I peeled the tape and opened it. Inside, neat folders tied with string. A few USB drives, printed emails, photocopies of ID cards, contracts stamped, signed, and countersigned. Lists of payments to companies I didn't recognize. And there, woven through all of it, Rowan's name. And mine. My stomach flipped. There were loan agreements I'd never seen, putting me as guarantor for impossible sums. Domination, tying Nora Holden to shell companies in faraway countries. Enough to have put me in handcuffs if someone had decided to open those files years ago. I sank onto an overturned crate, the box on my knees, so I hadn't merely been collateral damage. I'd been a shield, a fake criminal waiting to be activated if things went wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck rose. I stood slowly and took the box, closing the lid with more care than I'd ever closed a jewelry case. On my way out, through a grimy window, I noticed a car parked across the street, engine idling. Windows tinted too dark. I pretended not to see it. At the corner, I slipped into a small grocery store and watched through the glass as the car crept by, slow as a question. My fingers tightened around the box inside my shopping bag. They knew something had been disturbed. When I returned to the hospital, Rowan's eyes flew to my hands before they even met my face. You found it, he breathed. Yes, I whispered, tucking the bag beneath his bed. And you didn't tell me those papers could have sent me to prison, too. He closed his eyes, tears seeping out. That was the point, to have you ready as another mask. Kink. I looked at the thin man in the bed and the small, heavy box under it. Temp, if the truth in your hands could free you, but also paint a giant target on your back, would you open the lid wider or pretend you'd never seen inside? Sleeping became impossible. Every creak in my apartment sounded like a lock being picked. Every unknown number on my phone was a threat waiting to speak. Yet when I opened the metal box at night, fear had to sit in the back row. The documents demanded all my attention. Names jumped from the pages. CEOs I'd watched on TV cutting ribbons. Politicians smiling in campaign ads. Judges praised for their impeccable careers. They were all there, linked by transfers, contracts, coded emails. Kent. And at the bottom of the chain, Rowan signed and sealed as the perfect villain. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. King. So I called someone who had once lost his job for writing inconvenient truths. Elias Varga, an old investigative journalist whose articles used to make powerful men sweat. Age had slowed his body, but not his eyes. They were as sharp as a scalpel when we met in a quiet cafe, 2 districts away from everything I knew. Why now? He asked after I let him glance at just 2 pages. Why bring me this after all these years? Because the man they buried under these lies is dying, I said, and because I finally understand my own ruin wasn't bad luck. It was designed. Elias's fingers tapped the table, thinking. You realize, he murmured, that if this is real, people will get desperate. Desperate people with money and no morals are. Creative, I've already had my life destroyed once. I replied. I didn't know why, but I survived it. What am I supposed to do now? Go back to folding napkins and pretend I never saw any of this? Hyuk. He held my gaze, then nodded slowly. I'll need copies, and we'll need allies. Someone inside the system who still remembers which side of the law they're on. And that ally turned out to be a young district prosecutor named Maya Corbett, a woman with tired eyes and a reputation for making enemies in high places. When Elias showed her a fraction of the evidence, the color drained from her face. If half of this holds, she said quietly, we're looking at a network, not a couple of rotten apples. I'll have to move fast or they burn the trail. Can you protect us? I asked. She didn't lie. I can try to protect the case. People are harder. Ken. That night, returning to my rented room, I found the door slightly ajar. Drawers open, closets emptied onto the floor. Nothing valuable was gone. My few pieces of jewelry, my cash, my passport were all there. Only one thing was missing. The old wedding album I'd shoved in the back of the wardrobe years ago. And they weren't looking for money. They were reminding me they knew who I was. At the hospital, Rowan's health took a sharp turn, high fever, shallow breaths, a move to intensive care. Machines crowded his bed now, beeping an irregular chorus. I told you not to dig, he rasped when I managed to see him. They'll come for you. They already have, I answered. I'm just done running without knowing why. His hand tightened weakly around my fingers. Then we need them to come when the whole world is watching. Not when you're alone in a hallway. Yek, Prosecutor Corbett called the next morning. We're going to request emergency raids, she said. Offices, servers, private homes. Once we hit, everything gets loud. Until then, they'll be quiet. And very dangerous, my heart pounded. And after it gets loud, her pause was brief but heavy. After that, Mrs. Halden, your life will never go back to what it was, for better and for worse. When justice finally knocks on the doors of the powerful, do you stand beside it, knowing that once those doors open, none of them will ever close the same way again? The first raid happened at dawn. I watched it on an old TV in the hospital waiting room, surrounded by strangers who had no idea that the trembling woman on the plastic chair was one of the invisible threads pulling on that scene. Oh, news helicopters hovered over the glass tower of an engineering firm. Police poured through the doors. A banner scrolled along the bottom of the screen. Massive anti-corruption. Operation Surprises, Business Elite. Elias's message vibrated my phone. It started. Stay where you are. Don't go home. Within hours, more images, boxes of documents carried out under cameras' glare. Executives led away with their hands over their faces. A former deputy minister hurried into a car. Surrounded by commentators speculated, denied, filled the gaps with guesses. Rowan faced the screen from his bed in intensive care, his skin almost the same color as the pillow. I knew their faces from boardrooms, he whispered. Never thought I'd see them from this angle. Do you regret it? I asked. He looked at me with something like relief. No, I regret not doing it sooner. Yeah. The victory tasted like metal on my tongue, because as some doors opened, others slammed harder. Leaving the hospital that evening, I stepped off the curb at the crosswalk when a black car shot forward, ignoring the red light. Tires screeched as someone grabbed my arm from behind and yanked me backwards. I fell hard on the pavement. The car brushed past where I'd stood a heartbeat before and disappeared down the street. The orderly who'd pulled me out of the way stared at me, panting. Are you okay, ma'am? That idiot almost killed you. My hands trembled too much to brush the dirt off my coat. That had not been almost. Prosecutor Corbett's voice over the phone was grim. They're panicking, she said. The more we seize, the more desperate they become. We've reinforced security at the hospital. Don't go anywhere alone. I wanted to laugh. Most of my life, no one had cared whether I walked alone or not. That night, Rowan's condition worsened. His lungs struggled. Doctors spoke in careful phrases, multi-organ strain. Years of malnutrition. Limited reserves. He drifted in and out of consciousness. But every time he managed to hold my gaze, there was one question in his eyes. Is it working? It is, I told him. They're on the news now, not in my nightmares. He exhaled a shaky breath. Then at least one good thing came from my cowardice. You weren't a coward, I replied, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. You were cornered. Cowards were the ones who hid behind your name. 2 days later, Prosecutor Corbett summoned me to her office. Files littered her desk. Her eyes had dark circles beneath them. We've reached the point of no return, she said. We have enough evidence for multiple indictments. But now we need something none of these papers can give us. What's that? I asked, your voice. The word hung in the air like a test. You're not just a widow of circumstance, she continued. You're the person they tried to turn into a shield. You found the box. You can connect the documents to flesh and blood decisions. The court needs that. The public needs that. Kel. I thought of my hand shaking over a sink full of dishes in a stranger's kitchen, of whispers in small shops, of landlords hesitating before renting me a couch. For 8 years, I'd been nothing more than the wife of that crook. Are you asking me to sit in front of the men who ruined my life and explain how they did it? I asked. Yes, she said simply. Kim? And if they decide prison is worse than silence and try one last time to shut me up? Her mouth tightened. Then I hope the fact that the entire country is watching will keep them from doing it. Oh, but I can't promise you safety, only meaning. Jure, if you had the chance to tell the world exactly how they broke you, knowing the ones who did it are sitting 10 steps away, would you take the stand or stay in the shadows that almost swallowed you? The courthouse looked different. From the street, it had always seemed distant and abstract, a place where important things happened to other people. Inside, the air smelled of paper, coffee, and something nervous, like too many hearts beating too fast in too small a space. Cameras flashed, as I walked through the front steps flanked by 2 officers. I kept my eyes on the tiles, counting them the way I used to count breaths, when anxiety clawed at my throat. In the hearing room, they were already there. The businessman whose smiling face had once sold modernization on billboards, the former deputy minister with the expensive watch, a judge whose name Rowan had whispered only once, followed by, "That's where files go to disappear." They all avoided my gaze. Prosecutor Corbett laid out the story with cold precision: public tenders manipulated, ghost companies, inflated budgets, funds diverted along marked paths that ended in private accounts and election campaigns. Every few minutes, she showed a document taken from Rowan's box. Len, letting the court and the cameras see the black ink that tied these men to numbers with too many zeros. Then it was my turn. "Missus Nora Holden," the judge said, "please step forward." "Cal?" My knees wobbled, but my legs obeyed. I sat, placed my hands on my lap, and realized they weren't shaking as much as I'd expected. "Okay. Do you recognize these contracts?" Corbett asked, holding up a folder. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded thin in the large room, but it didn't break. "They bear my name. I never saw them before retrieving that box." I told them about the day Rowan vanished, the debts that fell on me like bricks, the nights spent sleepless, doing maths that never added up, the jobs cleaning other people's messes, while my own name was whispered like a warning. "Ang." The judge listened, pen hovering above his notepad. "And how did you come into possession of the evidence presented?" he asked. So I told them about the workshop, the hidden panel, the box buried under a thin layer of concrete, about Rowan's confession in a hospital bed, the threats, the car that almost hit me. I spoke of finding my life forged in ink by people who'd never even met me. Al. At one point, one of the accused men stood up, red-faced. "This is a circus," he shouted. "You're taking the word of a vagrant and a bitter wife." The judge banged his gavel. "Sit down, Mr. Dane. You will speak when it is your turn, not when your fear tells you to shout." Kank's silence fell like a heavy curtain. When they allowed me to step down, my legs were jelly. But something inside me felt straightened. For years my story had been told by strangers. That day I had wrested it back. Outside the press swarmed. Questions flew. "Do you feel vindicated? Do you forgive your husband? Are you afraid?" I gave them nothing. My words belong to the record now, not to noise. In intensive care, I told Rowan how it went. His chest rose slowly, wires tracing his fragility. "They finally heard you," I whispered, touching his forehead. "Shah!" "They finally heard us." His lips moved. I leaned closer. "Did they?" "Believe," he croaked. "Yay. They didn't have a choice," I said. The papers spoke louder than any denial. Kakan. His eyes closed, and for the first time since I'd found him in the alley, his face lost that constant flinch of guilt. Ank. But even as some of the men who'd orchestrated the scheme were led to cells, one piece of the puzzle remained missing: the order that had turned Rowan into a living shield. Quankle. If the small players have fallen, but the hand that moved them is still in the shadows, can justice truly be called justice? Or is there one last ghost you have to drag into the light? The ghost showed up on the news 3 days later. Hank. I was in the hospital corridor, hands wrapped around a vending machine coffee, when the screen above the reception desk changed. A stern-faced anchor announced urgent breaking news. High-ranking official detained at border crossing with false documentation. They put his photo on the screen. I'd seen that face hundreds of times on television, smiling as he inaugurated schools and cut ribbons. Rowan had said his name once and then refused to repeat it, as if even speaking it might bring punishment. Elk. Attempting to flee the country, the anchor continued. Authorities discovered encrypted files on his devices, which appear to link him directly to the corruption network, currently under investigation. Okay. My coffee sloshed onto the floor. Out, prosecutor. Corbett arrived at the hospital that evening, more hollow-eyed than ever, but there was a spark under the exhaustion. We searched his house, his country retreat, his office, his safe deposit boxes, she said. He kept everything. Memos approving the scheme, instructions on who would take the fall, even a draft of the statement blaming your husband. Nuka. She took a breath as if bracing herself for impact. In those files, Mr. Rowan Halden is explicitly described as the selected scapegoat, and you, Nora, as were potential second mask if necessary. They also discussed the threats on your life as a way to ensure compliance. The world swayed slightly. Exisa situationrepid safe to susrak that party first string. So it's on record, I whispered. Not just in our memories, it's on record, she confirmed. We've moved quickly. The judge has issued an order. Rowan is fully exonerated of all charges. Officially, he was a victim of extortion and coercion. We entered his room together. He seemed smaller. Somehow, half submerged in sheets and tube, but when Corbett read the resolution aloud, his eyes widened, glistening. You're telling me? His voice was barely air. My name doesn't belong in their mouths anymore? It belongs in the files as the man who helped uncover them, she replied. Kemp. He looked at me then, and I saw the young engineer I'd once married flicker behind those tired eyes. I'm sorry, he murmured. For every year you hated me instead of them. I took his hand gently. I'm sorry I didn't question the story sooner. You couldn't have known, he said. They wrote it so well. We sat like that for a long time, the three of us. The victim, the survivor, and the woman who'd helped pull the thread. Machines beeped softly, punctuating the silence. Later that night, alarms blared. Doctors rushed in. A nurse pushed me out as voices yelled numbers and instructions. Words like hemorrhage and collapse burned the air. I clung to the wall, every second stretching like a rubber band about to snap. Elias arrived and waited with me, his old hands gripping the back of a plastic chair. Time became a blur of footsteps, muffled cries from other rooms. The metallic smell of fear. When the door finally opened, the doctor's face told me everything before his mouth did. We stabilized him, he said, but his body is very weak. The strain of these days, the stress. It's all catching up. I walked back into the room, legs numb, and sat beside Rowan's bed. He looked fragile, colorless, almost like he was fading around the edges. You heard, didn't you? I whispered, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Your name is clean. A faint smile touched his lips. Then, if I go less. Heavy, you're not going anywhere, I lied. Keck. We both knew that some debts, even when forgiven on paper, are still collected by the body. If the truth finally clears the one who sacrificed everything for you. But that truth arrives when his time is already running out. How do you learn to be grateful without drowning in guilt? The morning he died, the sky was oddly bright. There were no cinematic storms, no thunder rolling over the city like a drum. Just an ordinary blue with a few lazy clouds. Like any other day, when people hurry to work and children complain about school. I sat by his bed, fingers laced through his. The machines had been reduced to the essentials. He breathed slowly, each inhale a small victory. Nora, he whispered, eyes half open, I'm here. You remember the house I promised you? His lips curved into a faint, crooked smile. With the fig tree in the yard? Yeah. I laughed softly, tears burning. You drew the plans on napkins, sorry, I never built it. You built something else, I said, more fragile, more necessary. He frowned slightly, as if the effort of understanding cost him. You built a shield, I continued, and then you tore it away so they couldn't use it anymore. His gaze softened. I only ever knew how. To build things, I just chose wrong clients. His fingers tightened weakly around mine. Promise me, he murmured. You won't. Let them turn all this into a show. No interviews, no books, just truth where it matters, I promise, I said. Qua. Il. He exhaled, a breath that sounded like surrender and relief woven together. His chest rose once more, then stilled. Cack. The machines did what machines do, announced what my heart already knew, and the headlines that day focused on the fallen official. The trials, the shockwaves in political circles. Somewhere in the crime section, a small paragraph noted the death of Rowan Halden, recently exonerated engineer involved as a key witness in the corruption case. Ank. For the world, he was a footnote. For me, he was the axis on which my life had broken and realigned. Kep. Weeks later, the state held a formal event. In a solemn room, they read an official apology for the wrongs done to Rowan, and, indirectly, to me. They acknowledged the years of unjust accusation, the misuse of our names. They granted financial compensation, numbers on a page that could never buy back time. K. On the way home, reporters shouted questions. Do you forgive them? What will you do with the money? Do you consider your husband a hero? I kept walking. In the new apartment I bought, a modest, bright place facing a park, I placed just one photograph on the dresser. Not our wedding portrait, not some glamorous moment we never really had. Instead, a candid shot, Rowan with grease on his cheek, laughing in the old workshop, holding up a crooked shelf he'd just fixed. Eck. Underneath it, I slipped a folded note I'd found hidden inside the metal box after everything ended. His handwriting, cramped and shaky. You know, if you ever read this, it means I couldn't come back. Please don't waste your life hating me. Hate them if you must. Then, when it's safe, stop hating anyone and just live. That will be the only victory worth having. Echo. Some nights I sit by the window, watching children chase each other around the trees, listening to traffic in the distance. For the first time in years, I'm not waiting for footsteps on the stairs, for a knock that means danger. Silence no longer feels like a threat. It feels like a room that finally belongs to me. Reckon. I don't think of myself as brave. I think of myself as someone who was pushed to the edge until she turned around and asked, who's doing the pushing? Now, when fear tries to creep back in, I remember that box under the bed, the weight of it in my hands, the way my own name looked on forged contracts. I remember that I opened the lid and did not look away. So if you're listening to this, wherever you are, ask yourself one question. Whose silence has been paying for your peace? And what would happen if, one day, finally refused to stay quiet?